رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي واجعل لي وزيرا من أهلي. Now Prophet Lot, or Lut alayhi salam, he was sent to a nation which was basically had the disease of homosexuality. So he made a prayer to God, and in the Qur'an I'm going to show you two instances of him making prayer to God for protection against these people, these homosexual people who are gays, right? So the first instance, he makes a prayer to God, makes a dua, a prayer to God to protect him from these homosexuals. What does he say? He says, this is chapter number 26, Surah Shu'ara, verse 126. He says, "My Lord, save me and my family from what they do," right? From what the evil actions my nation does. The other instance is that this was chapter 26. The other instance of him making dua is in chapter number 29, verse number 30, where he said, "My Lord," this is Prophet Lut alayhi salam, Prophet Lot. He said, "My Lord, support me against the corrupting people," right? These are two instances. Now I want to show you something beautiful. He made a dua, a supplication, a prayer against these people for helping him against this nation. The way he made this supplication, the words are worth noticing. In both cases, what does God do? Of course, he is making a supplication to help him against such a people. But the question is, why in one instance he says, "Save me"? Allah narrates his supplication. One of the supplications he narrates, Allah. Why does he narrate or says in the Quran, "Save me and my family from what they do"? And in the other one he says, "Save me against the corrupting people." In one he mentions his family, in the other he mentions the corruption of the people. Why is that? Now look at the linguistic beauty of the Quran. Look at how perfectly Allah chooses the right supplication in the right place. In Surah Shu'ara, where he says, "Save me and my family from what they do," look at the crime that Prophet Lot, or Lut alayhi salam as you say in Arabic, is pointing out. Look at the crime he's pointing out of the people. What does he say? What does he say to them? If you go to a couple of verses before, he says, from verse 165, he says, go you into the males of the alameen, meaning you go into the males of the alameen, or you go unto the males of the mankind, meaning you don't go to the females for your pleasure, you go to the males, and leave those whom Allah has created for you to be your wives. Nay, you are trespassing people. Subhanallah. The crime he's pointing out here is that you leave your wives. What are wives? They are, when you get married, husband and wife, they form a family. So he's saying, instead of making families, taking a wife, you go to males. Subhanallah. So it was more appropriate to say, "Save me and my family," because he's talking about a family going to your wife, meaning marrying a wife. So it was more appropriate to say to mention that supplication which mentions his family, "Save me and my family." However, in Surah Ankabut, when he says, "Support me against the corrupting people," mentioning the corruption of the people, look at the crime that is highlighted in the previous verse. It's rather in the previous verse. It says in verse number 29, he says, "Indeed, you approach men and obstruct the road and commit in your meetings every evil." Subhanallah. Here he's mentioning the evil of the people. In Arabic, أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ وَتَقْطَعُونَ السَّبِيلَ وَتَأْتُونَ فِي نَادِيكُمُ الْمُنْكَرَ. Here he is not saying you leave the males and go to your wives. You don't go to your wives. He's saying you approach men, you obstruct. Or he's mentioning the corruption, and that's why it was more appropriate to mention that supplication in which it's mentioning the corruption of the people. He said, "Lord, support me against." Subhanallah. In the previous verse, he was mentioning the people not taking wives, and that's why it was more appropriate. In fact, he says, وَتَذَرُونَ مَا خَلَقَ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ, from your mates. You don't take wives, which is a family basically, right? You don't have the family structure. That's why it was more. Subhanallah. Look, even in both cases, look, it may be that he made one dua at one time, at one instance, and another dua in another instance at some other time. However, it's very appropriate for the Quran to select that supplication in which he mentions the family with the mention of the crime that relates to a family. And it was more appropriate for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mention that dua, that supplication which relates to the corruption of the people, where the crime mentioned of the people is that of
causing corruption. And subhanAllah, it's so like God could have mentioned any of the supplications at any of these verses. It doesn't really matter, but the beauty and the linguistic precision and perfection and this choice of selecting the right supplication at the right place shows the beauty of the Quran, taking care of the context of what's going on, right? It's just so the flow of the ideas is also smooth. It's just like you going somewhere, you're going at an event and you're dressed inappropriately for that event. It looks weird, right? Wearing, for example, going to a wedding and wearing sports attire, that's a mismatch, right? So that's the beauty of the Quran's language. Both of them, the same prophet making dua, making a supplication against for protection against his people. However, where the crime is mentioned of them, which relates to family, not taking a wife, the dua is about protecting him and his family. And where the crime mentioned about is the crime of causing corruption, the supplication mentioned is a supplication that relates to corruption. SubhanAllah, how beautiful is the Quran's perfect word selection. So may Allah, which goes on to show that the Quran is not random words, somebody randomly writing down, randomly copying words and taking text from here, ripping it from here, or simply writing whatever he desires. No, it shows that linguistic perfection, precision of the Quran, showing that it can only be divine. So may God, this along with all of the miracles, makes the Quran, of course, ultimately the divine book. May Allah give us complete conviction in the Quran that this cannot be a man's word, rather it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.